Welcome, everybody. Hope you all are having a phenomenal day so far. I couldn't be more excited about this next guest and this next session. I'm Jared Robin. I'm joined with Alex Lieberman. Alex built a multi platform business publication, Morning Brew, scaled that over 5 million subscribers across all the publications and sold that in 2020. Right now, he's the founder of StoryArb, B2B content company that helps businesses generate demand through content and newsletters and things like that. He's going to walk you through how to absolutely crush your company newsletter. Quick note, take screenshots of this, share with others, let them know you're here, add it to your newsletter, direct to Alex, to RevCon, to all of this. Alex, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Pumped to do this. This is going to be fun, everyone. We have a lot to cover and we have 30 minutes. So I'm going to try to get through everything. A few housekeeping items. So first of all, let me bring up my little presentation. As you can tell from the title, things are going to get a little spicy intentionally. Can everyone see this? So just say yes in the chat if you can see my presentation. Okay, sweet. We're good. Got some yeses. Okay, so how this is going to go is I have a lot of content to run through in the next, okay, yes, getting a lot of yeses. We have a lot of content to go through in the next 30 minutes. I'm going to try to get through everything. At the same time, I'm sure there are going to be questions about the things that I cover. Any questions you have, put it in the Q&A or upvote any questions that you would like to see asked. As long as there's a few minutes at the end, I will try to answer as many questions as I can. I'll also try to get back to any questions I don't answer during the session, after the session. So let's do the damn thing. Okay. I have two goals for today's talk. The first is to help you understand why your newsletter probably sucks, as the name implies. The second is to help give you the tools and the knowledge that you need to make it suck less. So I want to first show you what your newsletter looks today. This is a live view of your newsletter, pencil stash and all. This is what your newsletter is going to look like by 11:45. So that's the good news. Before we dive in, I want to start with some classic excuses about email newsletters that I hear from folks today. And I think it's really important for us to be on the same page about this. First excuse, email newsletters have peaked. What I will say to the email newsletters have peaked argument is that smart people, like very smart people, like Mark Zuckerberg, have been saying this for 15 years. Yet the number of people that use email goes up every year, and penetration of email as a channel in the United States is higher than any social media platform or messaging app that is currently being used. So that's excuse number one. Excuse number two, people say the email market is completely saturated. And what I will say is, yes, there are more emails with tools like Substack, ConvertKit, Beehive. The ease by which you can create an email newsletter is lower. The bar is lower than ever before. The ability to monetize a newsletter is easier than ever before. And so what in my mind that just means is the email newsletter space is just saturated with a bunch of dog shit. This is a current view of the email newsletter space. And I think this is just going to be accelerated with tools like AI that make writing easier. Love the dog GIF in the chat. That is an adorable dog. And I also think now that there's a more mature market for email newsletters, now that people have seen The Hustle was acquired, Morning Brew was acquired, now that you can monetize your newsletter on Beehive, I think there's a lot of short-term opportunism, which means that most newsletter creators are focusing on quick monetization and quick click next, please. I will click next now. Most people are focused on quick monetization of their newsletter versus long-term value for your readers. Okay, third excuse. People will say, we have a great newsletter and it doesn't perform. I'm sorry to say, if you are in this third excuse bucket, that if your newsletter smells like shit, it probably is shit. But don't worry, I'm going to help you either launch a great newsletter if you haven't launched it yet, or help you turn around your newsletter that you have that could be better. But my first recommendation, I always recommend people when they're getting into the email newsletter space, is to follow great email newsletters to draw inspiration from. So I just want to give a few shout outs to my favorite email newsletters. I have no relationship to any of these newsletters, but I look to these for inspiration as I am working on improving either Morning Brews newsletters or other newsletters in the space. First is called Smart Nonsense. It's basically a cartoon strip. It's like a comic strip put into email newsletter format. Second is Marketing Examined by Alex Garcia. The third is Big Desk Energy by Tyler Dank, the CEO of Beehive. The fourth is 5 Tweet Tuesday by Sean Purry. The fifth is Money Stuff, which is an OG newsletter by Matt Levine, who's a reporter at Bloomberg. And the sixth is called Internet is Beautiful. I would recommend that you subscribe to all of these and you kind of give yourself the prompt of every time you run through these newsletters, ask yourself, what is one technique that this newsletter does well that I may be able to apply to my company's newsletter? Okay, the fourth and final excuse that I hear people give about email newsletters is they'll say, we're able to grow our organic audience faster on social or faster on YouTube. Why should I focus on email newsletter when it is harder to grow? And my perspective on this is, yes, that is the case. You can grow your Twitter account faster or your YouTube faster. But what happens when the algorithm changes, which will happen on any rented platform on the internet? If you don't own your audience, you're shit out of luck. And so this is kind of the way that I think about just media in general. And I think it's a helpful framework for anyone who spends some amount of their time in their career thinking about content. Is there's three types of audience: rented audience, owned audience, and monetized audience. Every type of audience has value, but there are trade-offs. Rented audience is social audience. You can grow it faster, but you don't have ownership over your audience. Owned audience is where you have control over your audience. This is, think email newsletters, podcasts, digital or in real life communities, but they are harder to grow. And the third is monetized audience. And that is audience, typically your VIPs, your highest fidelity audience that is paying you for something that you give them. And so my whole view is if you build your whole audience just on rented platforms on the internet, building on rented land is generally a very high risk proposition. Okay, so we've gone through the excuses. Now it is time to fix your newsletter or to help give you the foundation if you're thinking of creating your newsletter from scratch. So, two rules before we go through these steps that I think are important for everyone to understand. One, I'm going to be talking about email newsletters as a destination, not as a marketing channel. This is a really important distinction. There are two general jobs that email newsletters can have, and I think most people think of like what has typically been the most popular job. Email newsletters as a marketing channel is what I would kind of put all email marketing in the bucket of. The goal is to get someone to open an email and then leave that email as quickly as possible for an ultimate destination, like your website or whatever your product is that you're trying to sell to your audience. That is not what I'm going to be talking about. Email as a destination is the idea that you should think about your email newsletter as a standalone product and business. And very simply, if you do not think your newsletter is good enough to succeed outside of your main business, like if your main business didn't exist, if you don't think your newsletter is good enough to succeed and thrive, then the newsletter you are creating probably is not good enough. And so I want to just kind of take you through what are the steps to go from bad newsletter to good newsletter. Basically, the 4 steps to go from pencil stash man at the bottom to awkward 2 thumbs up man at the top is picking your niche, setting your content strategy, picking the team that you're going to leverage to create the newsletter, and then actually creating the thing. We are going to focus on the first 2 steps because my belief is that by picking the right niche and setting the right content strategy, 90% of creating a great email newsletter has been done. So let's talk about picking your niche. Okay, I like games, and so we're going to play a game right now. There are three questions that you need to answer when picking your newsletter niche. If you score 3 for 3, you move on and you can keep creating your email newsletter. If you score anything less, you probably need to refine your niche. The first question you need to answer when deciding who is the niche or who is the audience that you're going to be creating your newsletter for is it a high need audience? So my general view is the way you determine if your audience is a high need audience is first you look at what job is your newsletter doing and is it one of the 5 key jobs that have proven to build successful newsletters. So there are basically 5 jobs that I have seen almost every email newsletter, successful email newsletter does one of these 5 jobs, sometimes multiple of them. The first job, a great email newsletter can make you better at your job. So if I use the example of Retail Brew makes the modern retail professional better at their job. Number 2, increase your status in a community. So an example of that would be Hodinky has an email newsletter for watch collectors and watch lovers. By reading that newsletter, you increase your knowledge to speak from a place of authority in the watch collector community, which for people who are in that community, building status is incredibly important. Third, a newsletter that makes you or saves you money. Give you an example of Money with Katie, who is a creator at Morning Brew. She has an email newsletter that goes out every week. That newsletter is filled with specific strategies and tactics for millennials who are living in coastal cities to practice better spending and investing. So her newsletter is a tool for these people to save money or make money. The fourth is a newsletter that saves you a bunch of time. I was referring to 5 Tweet Tuesday before by Sean Purry. Literally, what he does is he just spends hours a week going through Twitter. He finds the 5 best tweets on Twitter from that week. He puts them into a newsletter, he curates them, and he provides 1 or 2 sentences of commentary. And he saves people dozens of hours because he unearths the most valuable content that would have taken you dozens of hours to find yourself. The fifth job that a newsletter can do, and this is, I believe, the hardest, you have to be really good at it, is entertain. So Smart Nonsense, which is the newsletter that I was referring to before, through the comic strip kind of format that they brought to email newsletters, they entertain audiences in a way that I haven't seen other email newsletters do. And so that is the first way to decide of if you are serving a high need audience is your newsletter doing at least one of these jobs? If the answer is no, don't proceed, don't pass go. If the answer is yes, pass go. The second question to determine are you serving a high need audience is does your audience fall into one of the 2 following buckets? And I'm going to quickly talk about these buckets. The first high need audience bucket that I generally see is what I would call consumer passion areas. And consumer passion areas are what I would say are hobbies or passions that people have, not professionally, just in their personal life, that feels like religion to them. When I say it feels like religion, they feel like they are part of the community. They care so deeply about being part of that community. So examples of consumer passion areas are things like gardening, Legos, luxury art, cycling, wine, cars, etc. So consumer passion areas is one bucket. A second bucket is professional niches. And so professional niches very simply are niches that are organized by either your industry, your job industry, or your job function. Things like sales, software, the construction industry, retail investing, real estate investing. And so, at Morning Brew, our general approach was focusing on professional niches. But there are people who have created amazing email newsletters focusing on specific consumer passion areas like Formula One. Okay, so that is the first question. Is your audience a high need audience? The second question to answer is your audience trending up or at the very least not trending down? And there are 2 ways to test this question of do you have a trending up audience or a trending down audience? The first question to ask yourself is will the audience for this niche be bigger in 5 years? So is the potential subscriber base of your newsletter going to be bigger or smaller in 5 years? The other question you can ask yourself is, will the audience's need or passion for the information be higher in 5 years? So does this information get more or less valuable or important to who your audience is? So just to give you an example, at StoryArb, our audience is director level content marketers at B2B companies. My belief is that this audience and the need for the information in a content marketing focused newsletter will be more important 5 years from now because content is getting more competitive. So having information to stand out is more important than ever before. And the commodification of software, thanks to AI, means that brand and marketing and differentiated content is going to be one of the only ways that you can stand out in a sea of sameness on the internet. Okay, so that is the second question. Let's assume you've gotten 1 point on high need audience, 1 point on audience trending up. The third question to answer is this a valuable audience financially? So, very simply, there are two ways you can make money from a newsletter audience: indirect monetization, which means advertising revenue, where you are charging brands versus the subscriber themselves, and then direct monetization, which means making money directly from your audience. So these two monetization schemes are not mutually exclusive, but they are important to understand. So first, let's just say you want to decide if there's a strong advertising model for your newsletter. You need to answer two questions. Is it a high CPM audience? And is there advertiser depth? So let me just explain what that means. A high CPM audience means that advertisers are willing to pay a lot per subscriber to get into your newsletter. And what determines if an audience is high CPM is really about how valuable is your reader as a customer for an advertiser in your newsletter. So I'll just use an example. Morning Brew has HR Brew. If you think about our reader is senior HR professionals at a US based company, and let's just say a advertiser in that newsletter is someone who sells HR technology, the CPM, the dollar per subscriber that an advertiser is willing to pay to get into HR Brew is exceptionally high, because if they can just convert one HR Brew subscriber, one CHRO from a company to buy their technology, the average contract value is hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the first question is it a high CPM audience? The second is there advertiser depth? Very simply, if you do the exercise of you know who your newsletter audience is, and you start making a list of what are the brands that we think would be interested in getting in front of this audience because they believe they could sell their product to the audience, you should be able to get that list to 25 advertisers minimum. If it is lower than 25, you probably do not have enough advertiser depth to build a really robust advertising business that you can depend on. Okay, the second thing, or the second monetization scheme, is there a strong direct monetization model that you can run through your newsletter? And the short answer is you should feel confident that you can drive 7 figures in revenue per year, ultimately, maybe not today, but over the next few years through your newsletter, either by selling your main company's software product or selling subscriptions. You have to have belief that you can get your newsletter to 7 figures of direct monetization to be confident in the direct monetization model. Okay. So that is picking your niche. And again, I know there's a lot of questions in the chat now. I'm going to try to answer as many as I can before the end of the session. Let's move on to step number 2. Okay. So we talked about picking your niche. We're slowly working our way from pencil stash guy to 2 thumbs up guy. The next, and I would argue the most important step, is setting your content strategy. Okay. There are 6 steps to setting your newsletter content strategy. Who is your market of one and what are they saying? What is the problem your newsletter solves? What is the goal of the newsletter? What is the ideal frequency of the newsletter, as in how often do you send it out to your audience? What are the content sections in your newsletter that keep the reader engaged and satisfy the goal of your newsletter? And finally, what is the voice? And so I'm going to run through each of these a little bit more detail. And then I'm going to use Morning Brew as an example so you can see what our content strategy looks like in practice. Okay, so let's talk through market of one. Your market of one, very simply, is who is the one person, the single individual you are writing your newsletter for. You should be able to describe this person in excruciating detail. This person should be a real person, and you should be able to pull their LinkedIn URL that you are able to constantly sanity check when you're asking yourself if your newsletter has the right content or the wrong content, the right voice or the wrong voice. And so at Morning Brew, like I'll talk about in a few minutes, we have had the same market of one for the last 8 years. I literally have this person's LinkedIn profile in not a creepy way at all, bookmarked on my computer so I can reference it from a content perspective. You should be able to do that with your newsletter. If you cannot do that, your newsletter is not specific and focused enough. The second part of the market of one question is actually getting insight from your market of one. So let's just say you are not your market of one. You should be going and interviewing 4 to 6 of your market of one. So including the person, the actual market of one, as well as people who are similar to your market of one. You should be doing user interviews with 4 to 6 of these people before you ever create your newsletter. If you have an existing newsletter, I would suggest you do these interviews to basically have a good reference point for, is your newsletter actually serving the market of one in the way that you think it is? And there are 4 questions that I would recommend you ask your market of one. Where do you get your favorite content about this niche today? Second, what makes your favorite content so good? Third, if we could create the perfect newsletter for you, what would be in it and what job would it do for you? And fourth, what are questions or challenges or topics within your niche that you find keep you up at night or you are talking constantly with peers about? Those are the 4 questions. And so my whole view is, if you are not your market of one, you can't trust your own view on what the content should be because you're not writing your newsletter for you. If you are the market of one, so with Morning Brew in the early days, we kind of were our market of one, so it was easier. But if you are your market of one, then you can just answer those 4 questions that I shared with you rather than having to go do 4 to 6 user interviews. Okay, so that's the first part of setting your content strategy, is who is your market of one. The second is, what is the problem your newsletter solves? Very simply, you should be able to say in a few words the problem your newsletter solves, and the more painful the problem, the better. So examples of this are, we're solving the problem of someone failing at their job, or we're solving the problem of a retail investor losing money in the markets, or we're solving the problem of someone in the sneakerhead community feeling like they're becoming an outsider in the community. You want to, in 3 to 4 words, be as specific and ideally painful with the problem as possible. The next question is, what is the goal of the newsletter? And basically, everyone should be able to answer. I'm going to put it in the chat right now. Everyone should be able to fill in this phrase when writing down the goal of their newsletter. So I'm just going to put this in the chat so you all have it. You should be able to fill this in, which is, we help market of one avoid the specific problem by the solution. And we're going to talk about the solution in a second. And so the example at Morning Brew was, we help our market of one, his name's Aaron, who I'm going to describe in a minute, avoid looking like a schmuck in front of his boss by giving him a 5-minute conversational read about the most important stories in business today. Okay, so that is what is the goal of the newsletter. Next is, what is the ideal frequency? And the kind of the quick and dirty rule here is, if it's a news-based or time-hooked newsletter, you should have enough content such that you can create a at least 2-day-a-week newsletter. Ideally, it's daily, like we do with the brew, because my belief is that's how you build a true habit that becomes a subconscious habit. If your newsletter is evergreen, meaning it does not depend on the news flow, I would say your newsletter should minimum be weekly, because I think it's quite difficult to build a habit and become known as the best newsletter in your given industry or niche if you're sending it out less frequently than weekly. Okay, the next question is, what are the content sections? And the content sections, the way that I basically think about this is, there are basically a number of repeatable sections that, if you study the best newsletters ever, they use kind of similar types of sections in their newsletter. And so I think actually the best way to provide the context on content sections here is just to go through Morning Brew. So let me take you through the Morning Brew example. Let's quickly talk about market of one. Morning Brew's market of one is Aaron Stoppelman. Aaron is a 32-year-old who works in private equity, lives in Connecticut, comes back to New York on the weekends. He likes going to cocktail bars once or twice a week. He enjoys TED Talks. He's also enjoying playing with Replit Agent and Open AI's tools right now because he wants to learn how to code as a non-technical person. He's deeply passionate about the business world, and he's deeply intellectually curious. That is how specific we get with our market of one. Morning Brew's problem statement: we want to avoid Aaron from looking stupid to his boss and other people at work. The goal of Morning Brew: we help the emerging business leader avoid looking stupid in front of their boss by giving them a 5-minute conversational read about the most important stories in business today. And the frequency of the newsletter, 7 days a week, again, because it is talking about daily business news. We are time hooking onto what's happening in the world. In terms of content sections, basically, again, the content section should just be a reflection of how do you best solve the problem for your market of one. And so for us, our view is, how do we get Aaron to reach the bottom of the newsletter and be armed with all of the information they need to have a smart conversation with their boss at work? And so for us, the sections include an intro. Our view is a 2 to 3 sentence quippy intro from the writers at Morning Brew act as a very easy and non-daunting entry point into the newsletter. It creates a slippery slope for Aaron to keep reading. We then have a what's coming up section, basically a table of content, because our view is skim value is super important for the busy professional. And so we want someone to, in their first 20 seconds, know what they can expect from our newsletter. Then we have a long news story. The idea of the long news story is to share what happened, why it's important, and how you should think about it in your life. We have some other shorter news stories that we believe are important to know what happened and why it's important, but we can't go into as much length as the most important story. And then we have a link dump with the other stories that you should know about and that your boss probably knows about, but we don't have time to cover in a 5-minute newsletter. And then finally, we have brain candy, or brain food as we call it, which we think of as news adjacent content that is important for 2 reasons. One is it keeps Aaron reading, because our view is if we only cover the news, Aaron won't get to the end of the newsletter. But also for us, trivia, crosswords in our newsletter acts as amazing surface area to drive word of mouth for people to share in their group text, to share around the dinner table at home. So it serves 2 purposes: increasing the readability of the newsletter and for organic growth of the newsletter. Okay, the final thing I want to talk about in the Aaron loves candy. Yes, Aaron loves candy. The final thing I want to talk about in the time we have remaining is voice. Voice is incredibly important. And the simple way to think about voice is, if you cover the logo of your newsletter, or basically the header of your newsletter, if someone read your newsletter, would they still know it is coming from you? If the answer is no, they would not know that it is coming from you, then you do not have strong enough and differentiated voice for your newsletter. If the answer is yes, there's something right about your voice. And so that voice has been such an important focus at Morning Brew. And so I know we have 1 minute left. And so I'm going to try to run through how we have codified voice in a very methodical way. There's 3 steps to creating a great voice with your newsletter: build a persona, boil down to personality traits, and have examples of each personality trait. So the first is build a persona. We have been very clear at Morning Brew what our voice is. Our voice is the 30-year-old business professional who's deeply passionate. It's someone like Aaron, right? Aaron is the voice of our newsletter. We had a choice when we started Morning Brew. Do we want our voice to be college students interested in business, which is that was a lot of our reader base, or do we want it to be the 30-year-old who's working in business? My general view is you want your voice to be aspirational, because if you make it aspirational, the 30-year-old who's in business for the last 10 years will still read our newsletter. But the college student who may not understand every word of the newsletter while they're in college, they want to punch up because they want to be the thing they aspire to be in 10 years. And so if you have a choice between punching up or punching down with your newsletter, my recommendation is always to punch up. Okay, so we have this clarity that Aaron is the voice of our newsletter. Then what you do, the second step, is to boil down Aaron's personality traits to 3 very specific character traits. At Morning Brew, it was witty, deeply informed, and conversational. Okay, and then the final step is have examples, real life examples of what witty looks like, conversational looks like, and deeply informed looks like, or whatever your 3 traits are. And that is so important because you're going to have different writers join your team at different points in your company. You need to have a codified way of training your editorial team to write on voice, even though it's going to happen across several writers hypothetically. And so just looking at this slide, These are real life examples that we actually have in training for Morning Brew's writers, so they know what witty looks like, they know what conversational looks like, and they know what deeply informed looks like. Okay, we made it through it. I'm sorry I'm a minute late to the Rev Genius team, but we made it through it. So basically, we've covered picking your niche, setting your content strategy. I believe that that is 90% of the work that needs to be done to create a great email newsletter. The final steps are picking your team and creating the thing. Now, you have two options. You can do that yourself, and I can probably give another talk about those two steps, but also this is what we do at StoryYard. And so if you want help launching or running your email newsletter, we basically came up with a plan where if you book a demo for StoryArb and you mention that you were part of RevCon, we will give you a discount because we love working on email newsletters for companies. We believe it's the future, and it's why I'm so passionate talking about it. Thank you so much for the time. We're over. So what I'll have the Rev Genius team do is send me the questions that were shared in Q&A, and I will try to get back to as many of them as possible.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was insane. That was so good. And yeah, it's crazy. We did not have 90% retention. Actually, it just kept rising while you were speaking.
I think I need to take a nap now.
All right, I'm going to move everybody to the next session. And thank you once again, Alex. We're going to bring you back to another set.